Hi, Greg.
Hi, you. So it's October and it's not a full moon today, even though this is the month that Halloween is in. But you can see I shaved, so that's because instead of the big beard, this is to go with my Halloween costume this year.
This is the
So
half moon video.
half moon. Okay, we'll call it a half moon video. That works for me.
And
But
what's
we
on?
do have a very interesting subject today. We're going to talk about the FBI director, starting from the first Stanley M.W. Finch all the way up to the current one. And we're going to list them off, and you're going to talk about how they relate to your life. And I believe it's going to reveal some very interesting things. We already made a chapter about it in the book. So well, let's get started. Anything you want to say before I read the first name, Hugh?
There was no FBI when my family was President Lincoln's guests at Ford Theater when Bush shot him.
Right,
But
right.
my family investigated Lincoln's murder. Baker, Gardner, Fuller. They
Right, a man named
investigated,
Lafayette Baker investigated the Lincoln murder before it was called the
and
FBI. Right.
how many times have you witnessed the FBI change dates and names and places
Yeah, and
in
disappear things
stories,
that.
in stories about my life?
Yeah,
You
well, yeah, we'll talk about something here, and then we can't find it the next day on the internet. We even take screenshots of it, and then they just disappear things sometimes, and change information about very important facts of history. They just change it or disappear it altogether.
Yeah, they change names, dates, locations in stories they put up about my life, but they never. I'm not in any media, am I, Greg?
They have blacked you out of everything while referring to you and everything, but without
And how
saying
many different things am I involved in?
it's just about everything, starting from Kennedy to 9/11 and Hoffa in between there and a million other things. Georgia
Oklahoma
Guidestones,
bombing.
Oklahoma bombing, Las Vegas shooting.
McVeigh and Nichols lived next door to me. John Lennon's murder.
Now, before people
Austin.
just throw it out and just say, well, that's just too wild. How can it all be connected? Well, we're going to tell you because once you start understanding how these FBI directors are related to your life, it starts to make a whole lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, they've covered up my whole life in all media, and the media is all owned by the London throne. And I'm George Washington's family, and one of my murdered wives was the general who protected New York in 1776, William Heath.
So it makes a whole lot of sense why they lumped you guys together in your schoolroom, all these famous names, including Lincoln and Morgan and a bunch of others in your school. And one of the FBI directors we're going to talk about on here funded the school.
And just before we started this video, I showed you the best man at my first wedding to Nancy, whose father was Joe Jacobs of IBM. And what was that article about?
So your best man at your wedding started the Four Seasons Hotel.
Yes. And Bill Gates owns them.
Right. And now the FBI is attacking Bill
And,
Gates and the Four
and my
Seasons.
father-in-law, when I married his daughter, Nancy, who was also murdered and dismembered, he gave Bill Gates the software to make his first computer at Microsoft before Microsoft existed at my wedding.
Mm-hmm.
He also met my best man and purchased Four Seasons from him.
This tells me a lot about how the FBI is
He was an Air
responsible
Force mechanic, 15 years older than me. His name was Ken Lentz. It was my wife's friend. She wanted him and his wife to be the maid of honor and best man at our wedding, so I allowed it. And then Bill Gates ends up owning his trademark, Four Seasons.
Right. And now they're supposedly
it's in the news right now. It's in the news right now.
Yeah, in connection to this Israel-Hamas attack.
And then his partner was Alan, and I worked with Alan at the Christensen Corporation, where we built the Guidestones. And the Guidestones had nothing to do with killing Americans, nothing at all. It was Indian religion in 12 languages, because the chief was the chief of the largest tribe in America was our machinist, Ian Allen,
Mm-hmm.
Bill Gates' partner. And this
Mhm.
goes all the way back to when I was 17, 18 years old, 19, 20. And I'm in my 70s now.
Right.
You look behind me, if you look behind me at this farm, there's my third murdered wife, Victoria Mellon, in the door. And I had just finished cutting the lawn and took a picture. And she was dismembered and murdered after her doctor of 15 years gave her a pill that destroyed her heart and her kidneys and didn't tell her he was doing that. Then the Walters family from CBS, her phone was used as she was my wife's advocate, as my wife's ears were cut off and taken, and her throat was slit Halloween Eve. I always say these things, and this is Halloween, and my wife was in a wheelchair with muscular dystrophy. Couldn't walk, couldn't run away, couldn't even talk and scream for help when they sodomized, cut her ears off,
Right.
tortured her for 35 days in Johnson City, Tennessee, and then slit her throat Halloween Eve. And it was gay nurses who did this to her. And they used the advocate's phone as they cut her ears off and took them. They earmarked her.
And that would be Walters, like CBS, who covered the Kennedy assassination, and then you've got
right, exactly. And they had asked me to burn down their properties. Told me they'd give me 10 grand every time I burnt down one of their properties. I told Mr. Walters I wasn't an arsonist.
This will connect the media and how it's fed by the FBI to and the White House to run these stories throughout.
Yeah, they were trying to set me up to put me in jail again. They've done that to me my entire life after kidnapping me at 4 and murdering my twin.
Right.
You can go on with your list now.
Okay. Yeah, we just found out that the FBI may be involved in the case here. I don't really want to talk about it, but to be a distraction. But we just found that out. I just found that out today, so it's interesting that we'd already planned to talk about the FBI.
Who was the first director?
It is Stanley W. Finch from 1908 to 1912.
And when I married Westhouse, her husband, George, before me, his best friend was Finch. And he gave me an airport in Rochester and property to build a home on as I married his ex-wife. I bought those things from him. He took off in a white Corvette as Prince sang, "Give Me a White Corvette." And America got George Little in the White House. Finch, with George, they were both bikers, and Finch was a good artist. And together they would paint motorcycles. He was George's friend in the Renegades.
Amazing. Well, this explains so much about how the bikers are responsible for these murders in your life. They go all the way back before they were actually called motorcycle clubs and so forth. Same.
Yeah, well, the Renegades murdered my 4 wives and buried Jimmy Hoffa with a state policeman. And as my truth comes out, if it ever does, the world will realize these things.
Yeah.
So that was the first FBI director.
It's interesting, he bowed out, right? If I'm not mistaken, I think 1912 is the date of the
and then
Titanic sinking.
George Washington is my family member. He gave my family his sword before we were a country in the First Masons Lodge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was in Boston.
Yeah.
And I'm the Fuller and Putnam and Harris families. I worked with Putnam and Fuller all my life.
Which makes a lot of sense.
And Gardner's my aunt, and all these people are buried at the museum you used to be a tour guide at.
Yeah. Right.
And Mary, who was married to George, whose friend was Finch, she married me after my first wife tried to murder me with a butcher knife and threw me down 2 flights of stairs. A year after I walked in on her having sex with a Warren, Michigan police detective who was supposed to be protecting me because people were trying to murder me.
Right.
So Mary and George showed up, and her cousin Cook was trying to have sex with me. Her cousin Cook married Nancy, my first wife's brother, who was a DI at Fort Knox. And on the day she married him, she came to me in my house with Nancy and attempted to have sex with me. And Cook and Perry in Florence are Mary West's house. That's her family, her cousins. And I didn't know this back when I was 16 years old. But she married Nancy's brother just so she could hurt him while he ran Fort Knox during the Vietnam War,
Mm-hmm.
and asked me for sex. And then Cook plays a part in the museum where you lived. And all of this goes back to the Westhouse family who really murdered Jimmy Hoffa.
Right. Cook and Perry both have a role to play in it. So you want to go to the next name because that's definitely the history and the
Go right
underpinning
ahead.
of this.
Go right ahead.
And the next one is Alexander B as in boy, and then his last name is spelled B as in boy, I-E, Lasky, by Lasky. He was there from 1912 to 1919.
I don't know anything at all about him.
All right, we'll skip him. We'll go to the next one. We have William E. Allen, who was the acting director from just for a couple months in 1919.
And my family built Hollywood. So he was an actor, director, acting.
No, not an
director.
actor. He was just the acting director between two.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant he was a director for movies. And his name was Allen, his last name.
Yep.
And that's the guy I worked with at Christensen Corporation as my father-in-law, Joe Jacobs, gave Gates the software to make his first computer at my very first wedding to Nancy, whose father was Joe Jacobs of IBM. Allen. Allen is also the name of the detective who was having sex with her in front of my child as I worked. And I came home from work early one day, and she was on the floor in front of my daughter having sex with the police detective.
Right. Alan
That was his name, Allen.
Right.
And he didn't protect me from 2 people who were attempting to murder me. And they were murdering me with drugs and stealing my car and stealing airplanes, and then bringing drugs back on the airplanes for the renegades. And that's how I met George and Mary. They both sold drugs.
Hmm.
And I didn't know it when I met them. I never used drugs.
Right.
Go on. Who was next?
This one, I've got plenty in the book about this name. Before I even realized this was a director, I'd already mentioned this name several places in the book. William J. Flynn, Flynn.
You can talk about him then. And I went to school with the Flynn family.
All right. Well,
in Oakland County, Michigan, where all those little kids were murdered. I went to school with Flynn.
In the same class that you had Lincoln and Morgan in them?
Yes.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
I went to school with Flynn from kindergarten through high school.
Okay, well, Booth that killed John Wilkes Booth that killed Lincoln there was friends with Flynn, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
And then before World War II, you had another Flynn who made Oh, it was something very similar to what Trump uses. It wasn't "Make America Great Again," but it was "America First" or something similar to that. And he was a slogan guy who started saying that Pearl Harbor was uh, rigged ahead of time and all that sort of thing. So you had a propagandist kind of in with the actors there all the way back then, and he sounds so much like Trump today. It's interesting in his propaganda the way he talks. So those were the two people I had in the book about Flynn. Let's see, and Errol Flynn, the actor. We had Errol Flynn from.
It was
Now he was probably gay, Errol Flynn, and then and from Detroit, and that's why you had another gang show up called the Errol Flynns
and that's the
in
family I
Detroit.
went to school with, and they were gays.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
the Errol Flynns in Detroit came out of that. So that name has a big history, steeped at least back to Lincoln. So
World War II history, part of history says that Eisenhower and Truman had properties they wanted America's military to protect in the Pacific Ocean. They had hotels, and I can't remember what islands they were on, but part of World War II was to protect Truman and Eisenhower's properties.
right.
So I have to agree with Flynn on parts of that.
Oh yeah, there's some truth in that. I get that too. Yeah.
And
But
my
I think
family,
Trump is kind of borrowing his technique a little bit.
my family built Hollywood. Gardner and Fuller built Hollywood. They're the streets under the Hollywood sign with Detroit Avenue and Clinton.
Right.
My mother's entire family was murdered leaving church on Clinton Road when my mother was 7, and at that time they stole her properties in Hollywood because her mother, Mrs. Fuller, died. When they got into their car, they killed the whole family with a semi.
Yeah.
Their car exploded. My mother got thrown out of the car into a ditch full of water, and that's the only reason she survived. She was on fire, and the water in the ditch put the fire out. And she was scalded all over her body at 7. And her brother and sisters and mother were all killed as they left church on Clinton Road.
And you're connecting that to the actors because the Booth and Flynn were actors on the stage before
In
Hollywood.
Hollywood.
Right. Makes sense. Okay.
That's correct. And then my family, when Booth shot Lincoln, my family was Lincoln's guest in Ford Theater.
Right.
And then my family ran his mansion. They were caretakers at his mansion for the next 75 years. Henry Ford.
Fascinating. That's why Kennedy was in a Ford when he was shot.
And
right?
President
Ford was shot at.
That was my Uncle Tony.
Yeah. That was the caretaker at Ford Mansion. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was married to Susan King, and then the world got Stephen King. And President Ford's real name is Gardner and King, and I'm King and Gardner families. And they were running Henry Ford's mansion in Dearborn, Michigan, as I grew up.
Right.
They killed Timmy King. He was the last boy killed in the Oakland County child killings. As Ford became president behind Nixon and Spiro Agnew. Timmy King was thrown on my family's properties, and he was abducted off of, I believe, a 7-Eleven on Gardner Street. And he was thrown back on the properties dead and dismembered.
Wow.
As I lived on Hoover Street.
Yeah. Well, you
anything else you want to say about Flynn? I went to school my whole life with the Flynn family.
Which makes perfect sense, especially since you were with Flynn and Lincoln's family.
And then you already know the FBI hides me in all media. You know, you've researched me for 7 years now, wrote a 1,200-page history book about my life, and you know this.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're gonna like the next name because it connects with acting too. You'll catch on to that real fast. William J. Burns from 1921 to 1924.
What was his
Burns.
last name?
Burns, Burns.
When I drove tankers from Ohio Gas across country at the age of about 28, Burns was my security.
Well, that's interesting. And then you also
Yeah.
have George Burns in Hollywood, right?
Yeah, and George Burns marked my life when I married George's wife, Mary, whose cousins tried to have sex with me while I was married to Nancy.
Well,
And
he lived to be 101 years old or something, so he was probably alive back there in 1921, I imagine. I don't know. I have to
yeah,
look it up.
yeah, you got George Burns and Gracie. And my family wrote the King James Bible. I'm related to King James through Admiral Byrd's family.
Yeah. Wow. Well, the next one, this might take a little while. J. Edgar Hoover, who served the longest from 1924 all the way till 1972.
Yeah, and I lived on Hoover Street. I was born on Hoover Street. I was kidnapped off of Hoover Street by the FBI and London peerage named Osborn. And you can go on and talk about the things related to
I
that.
thought you were going to say then to hide it, they made the Hoover vacuums in order to hide.
Yeah, they made when they kidnapped me and raped me and tortured me. The way they always tortured me is they'd make me get on my knees, and then Osborn would take 2x4s and hit me across my thighs. He would torture me by hitting my thighs. I was 4 years old.
Right.
And Mrs. Long and Mrs. Wallace and Schultz, which became the Peanuts cartoon, Peanuts.
Yeah.
After I was raped in Osborne's basement, and Osborne, his family was governor of Michigan. And they always ran against Baldwin, my family. And then recently, my brother-in-law, Brian Baldwin, was murdered by a guy named Rusty Hawthorne. He called me on the phone the day he murdered Brian and told me. And I called my sister and she didn't believe me. And then she went to his house, found him dead. And Rusty Hawthorne changed his name to Rusty Killen and told me I was next and he was going to come out to California and shoot me in the back of the head next. And then you had Alec Baldwin on the set of Rust, handed a gun by the family of one of my rapists who kidnapped me at 4 and murdered my twin. They beat my twin to death and dumped his body in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Halls. Yeah.
Daryl Hall. Daryl Hall was in the basement where I was tortured and raped.
Right.
And Osborne, he always hit me and threatened to stuff me. He was a taxidermist. And 2 Osborne family members threatened to murder me and stuff me like the dead animals all over their house. As they beat my thighs.
And isn't that fascinating that Osborn
and they were beating my thighs, demanding sex.
Yeah, and that's where Hoover comes in and the acts that they did, like a Hoover vacuum.
And the little boy dumped in Pennsylvania, who was my twin, that's been covered up by the police and FBI. Now they give him a different name.
Yeah.
And the book was written to Mr. H, and I'm
right.
And I'm Hugh.
Right. So they even covered that up. As soon as we talked about it and made a video about it, all of a sudden they found this cold case.
The post office stole your book twice.
Yeah. It's just unbelievable. That's a perfect example.
You sent me a computer with the book on it, and the post office stole it. And then all these stories started coming out after the book you spent 7 years writing was stolen.
Yeah, and right as we made the video about the Georgia Guidestones, they blew those up. We make a video
And
about
there on the
yeah,
day they blew up the Georgia Guidestones, there was an explosion at my house at 4 a.m. in the morning.
yeah, and you
And it
were
was
you were telling me
dynamite.
about it before we found out about the Guidestones.
And it was dynamite on the very same day.
Yeah, they were letting you know what they were doing. It's unbelievable how this FBI works.
They work with bikers and make porno movies out of kids.
Right, right.
They were attempting to make porno movies with me and my brother, and they kept attempting to fly us off the Great Lakes in seaplanes to California to sell us as sex slaves in gay bars. And this is what they were doing in 1957. The governors, 5 families of 5 governors were doing this to me and my brother.
And that makes sense because J. Edgar Hoover himself was a homosexual with Clyde Anderson Tolson, and there's that Anderson.
Oh,
again.
what was that name?
Clyde Anderson Tolson.
Oh, and I went to school with Clyde.
Okay.
We learned electronics together and got our FCC licenses together. Anderson was one of my rapists.
He was one of the men down.
And he murdered, and he's one of the families that murdered my twin. They beat my twin to death at 4 years old, trying to get sex from him.
Yeah.
I'm still alive, so you know they had sex with me.
Mm-hmm. Then the FBI covering up Anderson. Oh, they've done a wonderful job.
Well, Anderson was one of my rapists, and then what was his last name?
Tolson, Tolsen.
Oh, gee, that's my 4th murdered wife.
Yeah.
Terry Heath Olson.
Yeah.
She was married to Olson before she divorced him.
Yeah.
And came to marry me.
Right, right.
T. Olson. So
I believe his middle name Anderson is probably referring to a family member named Anderson.
Yeah, and I lived on Hoover Street when Hoover was director.
This is the guy who marked you the most by far.
Yeah,
I mean they covered up that Anderson name.
Well, you had President Hubert Hoover. I'm Hubert Squire.
Yeah, Hubert Hoover.
Herbert and everybody Hoover. Always called me Huey.
Yeah, and your dad was Herbert, right? Went by Herbert.
Yeah. And the detective in Warren, his son, is also another Hubert. Nancy went and lived with, when I walked in on him, she went and lived with the detective for 2 weeks, had sex with him every day, came home pregnant, and then she gave the kid my name.
No,
isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and that's not only do they work with,
and then a year later, she come up behind me with a butcher knife, tried to stab me, and she pushed me down 2 flights of stairs as she stabbed me. Yeah. And I didn't call the police. I just turned around and told her I'm leaving and I'm not coming back.
Yeah.
And I did that.
Yeah.
She called the police and told the police I tried to beat her up, which was a complete lie.
Yeah.
I came home from my first job. I was going to my second job. She didn't work. I made dinner. I fed her and my kids dinner. And while I was walking out the door with my toolboxes, she come up behind me and tried to stab me. And that's the truth of that situation.
Yeah.
And she was my last murdered wife. She married Jeffrey Lavoie. And on the day they murdered Lavoie Finicum on TV, remember the FBI shot Lavoie Finicum?
Uh-huh.
They dismembered her. They cut her leg off. And she was murdered.
Yeah.
But her husband, he don't know this. Nancy wanted to leave him. She tried to get me to remarry her for 45 years, and I always told her no. She even met me in my daughter's basement one day before I moved to Tennessee, and she begged me to take her back, and I told her no. Why would I want to live with a woman who tried to stab me in the back with a butcher knife?
Yeah, well, she had been crazy because of her surgery and stuff from when she was a
Oh,
kid, and oxygen deprived, and
that's why I didn't call the
yeah,
police, because I knew she was the first artificial heart transplant on earth.
right. So you had a lot more sympathy on her because you knew she had problems. So
Her mother had German measles. She was missing a valve in her heart. Her doctor went into his office after he delivered her. He put her on oxygen. He designed a mechanical heart and put it in her chest the day she was born.
right. So she had a pretty rough upbringing, to say the
Because
least.
yeah, because she had lacked oxygen to her brain, she was slightly retarded. And I knew this the day I married her. She was also schizophrenic.
Right. And she liked to steal stuff, kleptomania, and she had all kinds of
And
little
she was
disorders.
also 21 when she raped me at 14.
Right. Yeah.
And I married her
You
because
didn't want to kill your baby because she was
right.
threatening to kill the
She
baby,
came
and
back
yeah,
and told me she needed money for an abortion.
right.
And I told her, no, that's my kid. I'm not going to give you money to kill it.
Right.
So I married her.
Right.
And then Kenny Lentz, her
At
friend,
14, right.
who created the Four Seasons trademark, and he was a mechanic in the Air Force. Evidently, Bill Gates met him at my wedding because Bill Gates owns Four Seasons hotels now.
Right.
And that was my best man's trademark.
Right. And there's the FBI attacking Four Seasons today. That's unreal in the news.
Yeah.
Trying to say Hamas stayed there.
And then there's another director, Allen, who was Bill Gates' partner.
Yeah.
So see, they released little bits of information
without saying what it's referring to, right?
But I never exist.
It's like the swirl around a black hole. There's all this light and stuff swirling around, but you don't never see what's in the middle.
Yeah, I never exist. Never.
Right. So back to J. Edgar Hoover. So we were talking about his gay lover, who was Clyde Anderson Tolson, and Anderson was one of the rapists with Osborne. Osborne runs the sex crimes division of the FBI to this day, and Anderson gets covered up in all the movies. He's Superman's dad on the latest CW. Anderson was the guy in the Matrix, and you will see that name Anderson on so many movies and TV shows. It'll just completely blow your mind. They have so covered. He must have really had a big part to play in
Well,
that
one
story
of
of
the
yours because,
bridesmaids at my wedding was Anderson. That was Nancy's friend, Anderson.
well, there you go. That makes
The
sense.
very family that kidnapped me.
Okay.
And everybody back in Michigan where I lived in Oakland County, Hazel Park on Hoover Street, that was Oakland County where they killed all those kids. My twin was the first kid murdered. And L. Brooks Patterson was sitting out in a police car as I was being tortured and raped, and my twin was murdered. And we were kidnapped with Camille Sirhan, Greg.
Right.
My twin was brought back from California with Camille Sirhan when I was 4 in kindergarten.
Right.
And my principal handed us over to Osborne. And her name was Long, and my teacher was Wallace. And all these families were governors.
Mm-hmm.
So, and my elementary, my kindergarten school, guess what it was named? I'll just tell you, Hoover Elementary.
Oh, right. Okay.
And then the FBI funded my school system.
Right.
As they tortured and raped me.
Yeah.
Isn't that
there with all the other kids together, right?
Isn't that interesting?
From history. Yeah.
And I lived on Hoover Street. And then my next door neighbor was Pratt.
Yeah.
He cut my father's hands off with a guy named Behringer. And in Napa Valley, you have that Pratt and Behringer Museum. They make wine.
Right.
And they were my neighbors on Hoover Street. And where were the Twin Towers built?
New York.
Yeah, but what street?
I don't know. Pratt?
Yeah, it was Pratt Street.
Yeah, Pratt Street. Yeah.
On
Yeah.
the day they murdered my uncle Admiral Byrd, cut my father's hands off at Divco where he made milk trucks, and my mother's family owned the patents on the milk trucks they were making, and kidnapped me.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, yeah.
All of this happened on the same day. They murdered Admiral Byrd. My mother was his nurse. Kidnapped me and my twin. They kidnapped me because Camille. Yeah. They kidnapped me because Camille was crying. She missed her mom and dad. So I put my arm around her while we sat in front of a piano singing the Pledge of Allegiance or whatever we were doing in kindergarten. And I said, I miss my mom and dad too. So they took me and my twin and handed us over to Osborn, the same family that runs the sex crime division. And they chained me to a toilet with Darrell Hall, Nick Andrews, Anderson, Long, and Wallace, and they were beating my thighs with a 2x4, demanding sex from me as they beat my twin to death and dumped his body. The teacher's
knowing fully well what's going on, right?
And they dumped his body where that last plane on 9/11 crashed. Only there was no plane wreckage there, was there?
Right. Yeah.
It was completely disintegrated into the ground.
Nothing left. Right.
And that's where my wife behind me here in the door here, she's standing in the screen door, Victoria Mellon. She was born in that same field. That's where her family was from.
Yeah. That's that area.
That's my third murdered wife.
Wow. Oh gosh, there's so many things I could say. You want to go to the next one?
No, you go ahead and say what you want.
Oh gosh, I mean, with Hoover and everything, and the FBI and Long and Wallace, and I mean, I was thinking about the oh, what'd you say a second ago? Got me thinking about Twin Pines. You were talking about Divco milk trucks and how they made the milk trucks for Twin Pines Dairy, and then you have
and the Indian tribe that murdered my wives owns Twin Pines to this day.
Oh wow, well that makes sense. So then you have on Back to the Future where they're having the terrorist scenes. You have the Twin Pines sign with the 9/11 upside down on it, and it's so obvious.
And the janitor that played Santa Claus at Twin Pines when I was 3 and 4, he would rape me in a closet there at Twin Pines.
Makes perfect sense. So that's why you have in the third Back to the Future, you have Mayor Hugh of Hughville and all this. I mean, they marked you to a T in that movie.
Yeah, I'm marked more than anybody on earth. You got Hugh of Borg. My mother's best friend was.
We need to do an entire thing just on Star Trek. We need
Renee Bennett walked into my mother's life as they murdered John Benet Ramsey. That very day, Renee Bennett came into my mother's house and made her her friend. And they were doing that because the renegades kept throwing chains on my car and trying to hit my pregnant wife. So I would run them off the road. So they murdered John Benet. They murdered John Benet Ramsey and sent Renee Bennett. So they wanted me to be on my knees again, getting tortured by having my thighs hit with 2x4s.
Right.
And they did that when I was like 35 years old. I was still fighting them alone. Nobody ever helped me.
Wow. Well, let's go to the next one. Let's go to L. Patrick Gray, Gray, from 72 to 73. L. Patrick Gray.
Oh, my mother's name is Dora, and you got Dorian Gray. It just disappeared.
Ah.
I'm the kid. I'm the kid that disappeared in all media.
Wow. That makes sense. I would never put that one together. Wow.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
I don't know that we got much more to say about Gray.
Well, that's my mother's name, Dora. You got El Dorado. All these movies mark my mother after they murdered.
Dora the Explorer with her little blue monkey.
Yeah, and I'm the little blue monkey. The monkey's the local square's out cutting his lawn. See, I just cut the lawn here. You can tell it's freshly cut, and there's my murdered wife. They marked me with the monkeys. And the guy that gave the world the monkeys, he went to church with me. The little Italian guy that organized the monkeys. He also made the gummy bear patent. And he built Four Bears Water Park right next to my house. Right next to my house in Utica, Michigan. You got this picture?
Yeah.
Where I stopped the illegal Senate gun and drug trade after buying property from Trump's attorney, Mazar. All the people who lived and rented the houses behind me, and there I finally said it. I've never said that before. They were drug dealers, and they were selling cocaine, LSD, amphetamines, cocaine, and little kids were getting overdosed in my driveway. And when I say little, I mean 2, 3, 4-year-old kids, because they were distributing the drugs on Good Humor trucks at the auto companies, Chryslers, Fords, Chevrolet. They would drive in with a Good Humor truck at lunch and distribute drugs to the union workers. They had a good trade going there with the Senate. And then when I stopped that illegal gun and drug trade, they kidnapped my daughter as they put me in jail for a year. I stopped the drug trade. They put me in jail for a year. They told me I was drunk driving because the drug dealers poisoned my food with drugs trying to kill me. And then one day I had, night vision and police in my driveway with FBI.
Yeah.
And they had all these laser targets all over my head and my body. So I ducked down in my kitchen. They broke into my house and they drugged me with drugs. I didn't die. I called my best man at my wedding to Mary Westhouse. And he came in, told the police I tried to kill myself, and he stole my blunderbuss. And he knew I didn't try to kill myself. The drug dealers and police attempted to murder me with drugs, and they covered all this up.
And somehow you
put me in jail. They put me in jail for a year, and they made movie stars out of all the drug dealers. And this happened in Macomb County after they murdered my Judge Hunter Stair, who gave me custody of my kids. And my daughter was kidnapped off her bus with one of the Kennedy family girls when she was 7, and they had her locked in an earth mover, and they were going to bury her back in about 79, 80. And I rescued her. And all this is covered up in the news.
Then they murdered Hunter Stair, the judge.
Yeah, at Suffrage Air National Guard. And that's Cheney recalled the Air National Guard where I lived 45, 30 minutes before 9/11 happened.
Right.
That's not coincidence. And they murdered the doctor. I took my daughter to the doctor after she was kidnapped. She talked to him for 5 minutes. We left his office, and he was dead 5 minutes later.
Wow.
And he was younger than me, and I was 35 at the time.
Wow.
They said he died of a heart attack while jogging 5 minutes after I left his office. And he wasn't jogging. He was making out the report on my daughter's first visit. And Oakland County did this. Sheriff Hackle did all of this. They said that Judge Hunter Stair was drunk leaving Suffrage Air National Guard and had an accident, and that's a lie. And I know these things firsthand.
Right.
he gave
That's
me
pretty
custody.
obvious, right?
He gave me custody of my kids, and on the day my daughter was kidnapped, he was murdered. The
Yeah.
following day,
Wow.
I took her to a doctor to have her examined, and the doctor was murdered. And none of this is in the news.
Right.
This was Oakland County working with or Macomb County Sheriff Hackle, and Sheriff Hackle had put me in a dog catcher's truck before he was a policeman and was trying to arrest me at a party.
So if
You know,
anybody doesn't think the police can be corrupt, they definitely can.
and Hackle told me when I was 14 years old he was going to get me one day.
He did. Yeah.
Yeah,
Years
he
later,
got me
yeah.
when I was 35,
Yeah.
as he was sheriff in Macomb County.
Hmm.
And he covered up the murder of a county judge, Judge Hunter D. Stair, at Selfridge Air National Guard. And I don't think these things, I know these things. And I also know the pilots who Cheney recalled on 9/11. I know them.
You do? Well,
Yes.
you might want to add that in that chapter. I didn't know that.
No, I won't bother. There's enough in that book, and it's all truth.
Learn something new every day.
And there's
I,
so much more. But you know, when Hoover was FBI director, they tried to tell me I robbed a bank. I was driving down I-75 with 5 kids I had just adopted in my Rambler, a little old Rambler that was probably 20 years old, and they told me I robbed a bank.
Hmm.
And they pulled me over with 5 kids in my car with shotguns. And this was state police and FBI that did this.
Hmm.
And then, you know, the Westhouse family introduced me to Whitey, and I needed a new car. So Whitey sold me a car, and they had introduced me to Whitey 2 weeks before Hoffa disappeared.
Oh, we haven't got to that director yet.
Oh, what was his name?
Oh, we're getting there. I think he's 2 to go. Let's see.
Oh, okay.
We got, I doubt you'll know anything about the one between the two because I've never heard you mention this name before. William D. Ruckelshaus.
What was his name?
William D. Ruckelshaus. He was only there for about 5 months in 73.
Well, that sounds like that TV movie, the one, the series on the beach with all the good-looking girls. Hasselhoff.
Oh, Hasselhoff.
Yeah.
This is Ruckelshaus. Like I think it's German.
How do you? Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
H-A-U-S.
Isn't that interesting how they put all these Nazis in to run the
Yeah.
government?
That's definitely worth mentioning because yeah, CIA does the same thing.
Yeah, probably that was Bush president yet?
No, this is way back here in this is 73 here, Ruckelshaus.
Old man Bush was president.
No, he was running the CIA.
Oh, that's when it was Nixon and Watergate.
Yeah,
Watergate.
there you go. There you go.
Oh, okay.
Now the next guy. Now this is where we get into Jimmy Hoffa here. This guy was here from 73 to 78. His name is Clarence M. Kelly.
Oh, gee, Kelly interviewed me for 3 hours. He gave me full reign of his TV and radio station. And then he created Q.
Yeah.
And Robert Kennedy, he's part of Q, which is just a group made to hide my truth.
Yeah.
By the guy that ran the FBI. Interesting. Yeah. Very interesting.
And Kelly just happens to look an awful lot like a clown named Kelly, huh? Emmett Kelly.
Yeah. And my father-in-law, who really murdered Jimmy Hoffa, Bud Westhouse, he was in the clown union with Emmett Kelly.
Emmett Kelly, right.
And Bozo. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he lost his job at the state police because he murdered an innocent guy. And he always bragged to me about that. He was proud of the fact that he murdered an innocent guy.
Wow.
And then when he tried to murder me, and my wife's cousins tried to murder me in front of Bob Seger's house. That's when I divorced my wife, Mary.
And the Kelly that interviewed you, he said he was a contractor with the CIA, but why do I get the feeling he had more to do with the FBI than the CIA?
That was FBI.
Right. Well, the next guy,
And then when Hoffa disappeared, I was the first guy they detained.
yeah,
Because I bought the car from Whitey, and half a mile from Whitey's residence, the car broke down. So I junked it and bought another car from somebody else.
right, yeah.
The transmission fell out of it. And
So
I
the
was
FBI detained
and listen, yeah, the FBI, I had like anywhere from 10 to 12 agents detain me right in front of my 5 kids in my Troy, Michigan driveway in Oakland County, where L. Brooks Patterson never solved a single kid murder. And he was right outside the house when they murdered my twin in 57. And he was brought to me with Camille Sirhan. And then 11 years later, they framed Sirhan for Bobby's murder, which is a complete bullshit lie.
Right. Yeah, we didn't mention that when we was talking about that director.
No. And then this director, what was his name again?
Kelly and
Kelly.
Then,
Kelly made Q. And then Robert F. Kennedy, he believes the CIA murdered his father in JFK.
Right. Yeah,
and they had nothing. They had nothing to do with it. Why would the CIA, funded by the Navy, and run by Navy Secret Service, kill Kennedy, who was a hero in World War II? It makes no sense. The FBI murdered Kennedy. Hiding all the kids they murdered in Oakland County, just like they murdered President Ford, whose real name was King and Gardner, Timmy King.
Yeah.
And L. Brooks Patterson murdered his own kid in an Oakland County jail cell, hung him in his belt after I told him he was my good friend in high school. And in 8th or 9th grade, I told Timmy Patterson Oglesby about his uncle being outside while my twin was murdered. And he went home and told his uncle about this, and they hung him in his uncle's jail cell that night in Oakland County. Theodore Oglesby was his name. His mother was the Patterson family. And then at the same time, Greg, the Patterson family was delivering hookers to Bill Clinton.
Yeah, as he's governor of Arkansas.
With Mary Westhouse.
Yeah.
These were 2 state policemen.
Perry. Sure, yeah, state troopers, Perry and Patterson.
And Patterson. And that's Mary Westhouse cousins and the guy who was sitting outside the house when Osborn would beat my thighs with 2x4s demanding sex. Ed and Gary Osborn did this to me with Anderson, Andrews, Long, and Wallace, and Schultz. While Darrell Hall watched. And then you have Darrell Hall's TV, and he gave everybody the Eagles. And they're hiding all of this. And then at the same time they murdered all my wives, they stole $3 trillion from me.
Wow.
And who was the next FBI director?
Well, he was only there for just a few months. Another one of the acting directors, just for a few months. His name was Adams, James Adams.
Judy Adams is a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
You know, we have President Adams.
Yeah.
And she knows I'm telling truth. She's one of the few people, she's in Bowe, the group you created, and she's one of the few people that likes everything.
Very few people who actually try to help.
Because she knows I'm telling the truth, and she's seen all my documents in person.
Yeah.
Her and I go out for dinner now and then.
Yeah.
She lives fairly close to where I live now.
Right.
Who was next?
Now here's the one I think you're going to have a lot to say about. He was there from 78 to 87. William H. Webster.
Yeah, Webster put my stolen trademark bottom line in his dictionary after they stole it right out of the Library of Congress.
Mhm.
It was $3 trillion in theft. I was an ASCAP BMI publisher with a publishing license out
And
of
that makes perfect sense. When they steal the money, they turn it. Webster turns it in the dictionary, calls it an accounting term. That makes so much sense.
right as my brother got a degree in accounting.
Yeah, that too.
And we
Right.
both grew up on Hoover Street. And this is as they murdered my first wife. Or not my first wife. My wife after Mary Westhouse, Kiki Nelson. Now, Mary Westhouse is still alive, but my next four, 2 fiancés and 2 wives, are all raped, dismembered, and murdered.
Yeah.
I have a murder case that they never try to solve.
Mm-hmm.
And I post all our videos right to the FBI, and they
Yeah.
never get involved, do they?
No.
And then
And
you
any
have,
one of these stories is a national sensation.
yeah, Hoffa, Oklahoma bombing. Tim McVeigh lived next door to me with John Nichols. Nichols married Chapman, who shot John Lennon.
Yeah. Yeah.
My twin being murdered. All of these things are completely covered up.
Right. Hmm.
And I wanted to ask you something. I wish I had rewind on this video.
We're talking about accounting.
There's
And
too many different directions I can go.
I know. There's just so many.
And all of them should have been in the news, and none of it is.
Right.
And it's because London owns all the news. Greg, every time you and I make a video like this,
Mm-hmm.
somebody copyrights our video, and then Facebook takes it down in every other country on earth.
Right.
And they just did that with our Hoffa video yesterday. And they've done it with 5 or 6 of my videos that you and I make. And there's no music in here.
Right.
And even if there was, I'm a music publisher at ASCAP BMI. I have a right to use it.
Yeah. Well, we've seen the owner
And
of
as
Fox
a
News
publisher,
copyright him too.
as a publisher with a federal license, I have the right to put CMP on any video I make. And I do that on all our videos, but somebody goes behind us, copyrights them, and then the FBI and Facebook and YouTube and anywhere we post them, they say somebody else owns our videos.
Yeah, really think about that, everybody listening on YouTube. What if you made a video just like we're doing right now, and every time you do it, somebody claims it as their personal copyright that you don't know? And it was Rupert Murdoch from Storyful over there in Scotland doing it there for a while.
It's just amazing how they censor everything I say. So what was the director? Oh, Webster. Webster stole my trademark. My trademark was stolen in '69 with the WWF trademark by DuPont and Claire Cummins.
Yeah.
And Webster was heading the FBI as he put my trademark in his dictionary.
And funding your school. Yeah.
And they all know I created the word. It was my band. It was my publishing license in New York on Broadway at ASCAP from Foley Federal Court. And then on 9/11, what'd they do, Greg?
Well, they destroyed the trademarks and licenses out of the World Trade Center. They just destroyed
The
any
receipt,
record of it.
the receipts. And what did I have in the Pentagon?
That would have been the court case there with
It was a civil rights case with the
against
Groves
Groves.
family. It was against the family that built the Pentagon because they had stolen my trademark.
Right. And Webster would have been a big, strong part of that.
Yeah, he
Put
was
that
the
in the-
director
yeah.
of the FBI, and he knew exactly why he put the word in the dictionary, hiding the theft of my trademark, which was a $3 trillion theft.
This guy, he's going to have some history behind him. He's going to be the family of Noah and Daniel Webster from the dictionary. I mean, that's just fascinating, isn't it?
That's
Huh.
one of my grandsons with Terry. His name's Noah.
Interesting. Yeah.
It figures, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, now there's another guy who's only here for 5 or 6 months.
All of my wives were murdered, and they lived with me.
Mhm.
I think I know when my wife was murdered. I found
Right.
2 of them murdered, revived them with CPR, flew them to hospitals, and then they were both murdered on holidays.
Right.
35 days later.
Yeah, in the hospitals when you're not there.
My first murdered wife was murdered. I wasn't in Michigan. She was murdered Christmas Day. When I went back to Michigan to talk to L. Brooks Patterson when he was still alive,
Yeah.
they murdered our daughter Serena. As I sat in L. Brooks Patterson's office, they murdered my brother-in-law's son, Tony Jr. They murdered Tony de Blasio's son, Tony Jr., and then they murdered two kids from my family in Indiana, all in the same afternoon as I sat in L. Brooks Patterson's office, trying to tell them the truth of who the real Oakland County child killers are.
Yeah.
They
They knew
covered
you were coming. They knew exactly who the
They
killer
covered it all up with Dr. Nasser at Michigan State, a doctor looking at athletes' private parts.
Right.
That's what a doctor's supposed to do, Greg.
Right.
And they covered up the murder of 5 of my kids, my truth about Osborne and Darrell Hall and Anderson and Andrews. And then a year later, they gave you another doctor at Michigan State Central, I think, who was accused of raping all these students at another university. Maybe
Yeah,
the
he's
same
Michigan
one.
State. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe the same one.
Yeah.
And then my lead guitar player was Bob Sulik, who changed his name to Wood as Natalie Wood was murdered. And he and Osborne and Westfall and my little brother, who never knew I was kidnapped, all stole my business bottom line. Natalie Wood was murdered that day, as my little brother's wife had a kid named Natalie. That's what they named her, Natalie. As my lead guitar player changed his name to Wood.
Right. Changed to Wood, and then, yeah. This doesn't happen without FBI.
And this is as they stole my trademark, and the FBI director put the word in his dictionary, knowing full well it was stolen. He called it an accounting term. The world got David Letterman. My little brother, who went to Walsh College, the Eagles,
Yeah.
Joe Walsh,
Yeah.
got an accounting degree that day. And my murdered twin was dumped in Pennsylvania on Darrell Hall's properties as he put Joe Walsh on the radio and TV.
Right.
You got this picture?
Oh, yeah.
But the FBI doesn't have anything to do with it.
Right. I mean, geez, this kind of stuff can't happen without a national coordinated effort.
And then on 9/11, they said that I'm Hugh. They said that sad dam, the Hoover Dam, Hugh sane. They're telling me I'm sane as Americans blew up the Twin Towers with Israel.
Yeah. Pretending to kind of.
Yeah, they blew up a civil rights case in the Pentagon. They said a plane crashed in the field where they dumped my murdered twin and where my wife was born. And then the biggest thing is George Bush saying my name as my Uncle Mills filmed him for TV as the first plane hit the first tower. He said Hughes Structures. He said my name because he knew they were blowing up the receipts to my business and to my civil rights case in the Pentagon. He knew that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and we have the video.
And where they
in the
murdered
playlist.
Terry Olson and Victoria Mellon on that farm right here behind me, that's a Civil War property. That was the Battle of Blue Springs. I had a farm behind me, and I dig up machine guns from the Civil War there.
Oh, I thought you just had little pistols and stuff.
No,
Okay.
I would get cases of bullets and machine guns buried there.
Wow, that's interesting.
That was the Battle of Blue Springs. That's where the North turned the South back and then eventually won the war.
Wow.
And I got that farm from Mr. Manning. And Garrison was my alumni where I taught science. They sold me this farm, murdered two of my wives, and Russell, who appointed Manning and Garrison, died sitting at a table with me eating dinner.
Huh.
And all of this was done as CBS helped murder my wife and attorney.
Now, how did I miss that? Manning and Garrison died at the table with you?
No, Russell, the guy who the family that appointed Manning and Garrison to head the Warren Commission. And Manning from Senator Graham's state, and Senator Graham owns Channel 4 and WWJ, the two biggest news stations in Detroit, TV and radio. And they hid my murder with Roseanne Barr and Osborne for 70 years now. My twins' murder, they've hidden that, and my kidnap. Senator Graham Media, they own it. Peter Graham and Bob Graham was a senator. They lived down in Florida by Trump. And you know, Senator Graham was Trump's best buddy when he was president.
Yeah.
They're still hiding me. And then who got Donald Trump into office?
I mean, you talking about Giuliani or
Giuliani. And you know he's a big criminal.
Osborn. Osborn is his campaign manager.
Yeah, Osborn. And Osborn kidnapped me at 4, and they murdered my twin.
Unbelievable.
And then who else? Who else helped him?
Who else helped?
I'll just tell you, Stone.
Stone
cut the bone out of my foot on the day they murdered JFK, pretending to be a surgeon, and he wasn't a surgeon, and he was running a hospital. When I was sitting in Elbrooks-Patterson, I put in a Freedom of Information Act. Stone was supposed to go to jail for 30 years for performing operations, and he had no medical training. He was running a hospital.
Oh, and Halls is helping Trump also. He turned himself in. Everybody
that kidnapped me at 4 and murdered my twin was one of Donald Trump's partners.
Right.
And Donald Trump borrowed $5 billion 5 times from 5 U.S. banks, never paid a penny back. That's why he had to go to where the renegades meet in Berlin, Deutsche Bank, to borrow money to run to be president. And that's Nazi Germany. That's West Berlin. And that's where the Indian movement meets, in West Berlin, because they hate white people.
Yeah.
And my wife, Mary Westhouse, she was the head of that Indian movement. She was his secretary.
They were fan of Nazi
Germany. John Thomas.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that's who funded Trump.
Yeah, well, this makes perfect sense when you figure that Putin shot Benjamin Hall there down in Ukraine, the Fox News journalist, right as the war began.
He knows my story.
Yeah.
Back after 9/11, I wrote him a letter. And all he did was sing a song to me from a bar in Russia. He said, "On Blueberry Hill." And you all know what blue signifies. And they
Yeah.
even
It's
have
a
bluebirds on buses my family owns the patents for, but the government stole the patents.
right.
And then they're still selling the properties and assessing the properties to my dead mother's body. She's been dead since 1996 or something, 1999.
Mhm. Well, yeah.
And who was the
I,
next? Who was the
th-
next?
I find this really fascinating, this next one, okay? I don't know the name, but the time is very interesting. He was there from May of 87 to November of 87, and right in the middle of that is when you were about to be on a plane wreck and were drugged right there on 10 years to the date after Elvis's death to
And
the
Bush,
day.
and that's when Bush was president.
No, well, let me think.
That's when he was elected.
Yeah, I guess so. So, yeah, he would have
Bush
been
used that plane wreck to say Muslims poisoned me. And then when my Uncle Mills was filming him, he said my name.
right. But I
And
just find
the
that
Bush,
fascinating. He was only there right in the middle of your plane wreck here.
the Bush family, and I had just left IBM with Jim Fugit and Joe Jacobs. And I was
Yeah,
with
right.
two linebacker families, the Washington brothers from Chicago,
Uh-huh.
who joined Detroit, and their sister was my secretary at IBM. Bush used that airplane crash to say Muslims caused 9/11 in a roundabout way.
Right, I get it. It does his name mean anything? John Otto, Otto?
Yeah, too much. Who was
Anything
that?
especially about the plane wreck or anything?
Huh?
Especially does it relate to the plane wreck or anything by chance?
It's OT2. My wife here behind me, her first husband was Tom. He was selling drugs and prostitutes with a sheriff in Harrisville, Michigan. That's why
Okay.
he kicked Vicky out of the house and started living with her 12-year-old babysitter.
Okay.
Tom, 2, they doubled me. They
I
gave
mean,
you,
I get it. That'd be hard for a lot of people to follow.
Stern gave you Huey Lewis in the News and Billy Squier. Billy Squier came from Germany. Huey Lewis came from France. And Huey Lewis's bass player lived next door to the house I bought for my family in Sterling Heights, Michigan. And my bass player, my little brother, was Jeff Westfall, who attacked you. They attacked your wife's car in Ohio, didn't they?
Well, yeah, they refused to fix it. Towed it up there to
They
Marietta.
left it
Refused to fix
sitting
my
there.
car.
They left it sitting there for a $12 part or something
Yeah,
for 3 or 4 months. Didn't
right,
fix it after
right.
they stole your book.
And that Westfall that replaced you, he died on a plane wreck, just like you were talking about a plane wreck.
Yeah, yeah. And as a publisher, I made the airlines pay royalties to people like Bob Seger and Dolly Parton and Burt Reynolds because they were playing the movies and the music on the airlines and not paying them. I also made cable TV do that.
Yeah, as part of the reformation of the Berne Convention in 89.
9900
That's like 2 years after this director here.
9900th and 101st sessions of Congress. We rewrote the Berne Convention, and I was working with every senator, every congressman in the country.
Yeah.
With Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy wrote me personal letters, and Osborn came to my home in Tennessee and stole them all.
Right. Yeah, another Osborn. Yeah.
As Osborn's ministry from Alaska, where Joe Biden just visited Alaska, Osborn's ministry, they stole all my letters from Kennedy, three Kennedy family members.
Suppose he picked up the letters while he was up there.
John, Bobby, and Ted all wrote.
Yeah. Right.
And
Osborn came by.
Ted was working with me as he was murdered with cancer, like John McCain, brain cancer.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it.
And they hit me over the head with a hammer trying to kill me. At the same time, they hit a casino where I would send entertainers to over the head as she met the FBI. And
Well, hey, I'll give you two more names here.
This is Osborne's mafia that runs the sex crime division in California with the FBI.
Right. They paid you a visit from Alaska.
The entire lawyers bar stole my trademark to study to pass the bar exam 55 years ago.
Right. Call it the bottom
line. Every lawyer
bar.
in the country has studied out of my stolen trademark, and all the
bottom line bar exam. Right.
Yeah. As I live next door to Roseanne Barr, who works for Graham Media, and she told the world that she was being raped by Hollywood.
Oh my gosh, something else wow. I just noticed something else.
Then Kathy O'Brien, Hoffa raised Chucky O'Brien. They lived on the same street I did in Michigan. Oakland County, where all the kids were disappearing. And then Roseanne Barr's family appointed Epstein, who provided little kids to the King of England, or the prince, who could have been king, to Bill Clinton, just like Patterson. Epstein was providing little kids to Clinton, Trump, Musk.
Yeah.
And when you look into all their backgrounds, state police was helping Epstein do it.
Makes sense.
And then my whole family was murdered on Clinton Road, leaving church.
Right.
It all makes sense, Greg. And this is the FBI in my life.
Right.
So I was detained for Hoffa's murder because Whitey sold me a car. Westhouse introduced me to Whitey a month before Hoffa was disappeared, and Westhouse's mother was with Hoffa at the Sly Fox as he disappeared, and her ex-husband, a state policeman, already had the hole dug. And on the day Hoffa disappeared, so did my horse and a goat. So a state policeman stole my horse.
Right.
There's no news about it. On the day Hoffa disappeared, and I was in his union.
Yeah, you were just joining the Teamsters that day. Same day.
Yeah, and I was supposed to meet with him the next day.
Wow.
And then the FBI detained me for his murder before they even detained Chucky O'Brien. No news. No news whatsoever. Look at the books and movies they've written about it.
Right.
And then who's this guy, Sheerhan? He wrote a book about Hoffa, made a movie.
Right. And now you were talking about Sheeran today.
Yeah, he follows my posts.
Disney Channel has a special about him right
because
now.
Because everything they said about Hoffa is a lie.
So he's looking to see what you're saying.
And they buried Hoffa under G&G Auto. G&G Auto is Gaga.
Right.
Lady Gaga. And I'm a music publisher. And Madonna comes from Rochester, Michigan, not far from my home.
Yeah.
And I went to kindergarten with our mafia family, Lucrezio. Lucrezio, when they murdered Victoria here, Lucrezio come out to my house and tried to tell the police from 17 states that I murdered Marie from Graceland and I murdered the girl living with me. And the girl living with me, I bought her a ticket to Hollywood because I gave her a computer. When she told me she loved me and wanted to marry me, and I told her, no, my wives have been murdered and I'm not going to marry anybody. You can come live in my house, but I'm not going to marry you. I gave her a computer and she made a new boyfriend in Hollywood. So I saved up the money running my Gospel Notes ministry. I bought her a bus ticket and an airline ticket and sent her to California. On the day I sent her to California, the police put her on the bus. Locricchio, Madonna's mafia family, came from Hollywood. And her family called the police all from 17 states and said, I murdered Marie from Graceland.
Yeah.
And the police themselves put her on a bus.
Marie Presley? No. Marie.
She lived in Graceland. She lived in Memphis at Graceland.
Okay.
I knew Marie Presley when I was 28 years old. She used to come and dance with me in Warren.
Yeah, because I knew you knew her.
In
right.
Warren, Michigan.
Okay.
When I stopped the illegal gun and drug trade, that week, John Belushi was killed by a girl in Canada, and Elvis died sitting on a toilet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not coincidence that Osborn chained me to a toilet and would beat my legs with 2x4s demanding sex.
Right. And then 10 years later to the day,
my brother-in-law played in Mitch Ryder's band, and Mitch Ryder wrote the songs Elvis Presley was singing in Vegas and in his movies.
Mm-hmm.
This is not coincidence, Greg. And then they threw me in jail for a year, made all the drug dealers into Hollywood stars out where Osborne runs the sex crime division. And this is what has happened to our country, Greg.
Yeah. Yeah.
George Bush made all of Hitler's uniforms and parachutes right here, less than 2 miles from this farm. Throughout World War II, they made munitions, parachutes, and uniforms. He sold Hitler cyanide, and he sold Saddam Hussein cyanide.
Right there in the same town where that house is. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Wow.
And all the people in that area worked for George Bush making Hitler's uniforms and parachutes.
Well, they kept his limo there.
There is no lie in this. Yes. And then Dr. Oz took a picture of himself right there in Greenville, Tennessee.
Right.
Not even a mile from this house with Hitler's limo. And Bush put it there.
Osborne.
And then Americans, after most of the World War II generation died off, Americans put that Nazi in the White House.
Mm-hmm. Osborne, Osama, and Oswald. I mean, that's so obvious to me.
And then you don't look into Gretchen Fuller's murder, but you know, Ian Fleming.
Gretchen Fleming, yeah, okay.
Yeah. What did I say?
You said Gretchen Fuller, but yeah, I thought you meant Fleming.
Well, that's because my family donated money.
To create the Wizard of Oz.
Not the Wizard of Oz, James Bond. And Ian Fleming wrote the Wizard of Oz and James Bond.
Yeah.
So her disappearance has a lot to do with my life. But they also hide the fact that 3 people in my family disappeared at the same time she did, right in the same area, don't they?
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, Akers and Morgan, 2 little kids.
Yeah, Akers is the detective.
And here in West Virginia, the same month that Fleming disappeared.
Who was supposed to protect me and was screwing my wife.
Right.
And what's the other girl's name?
Morgan.
Yeah, and Morgan's my cousin.
They both came out of Beckley, West Virginia, somewhere near there.
Yeah, near where Gretchen disappeared, correct?
Well, it's a few hours away, but it was the same month and in the same state.
And then Austin Healy and my family Harris, Mr. Harris, who's in the Smithsonian, funded the James Bond movies.
Yeah.
And when I first moved here on the West Coast, there was a statue and a plaque dedicated to my family, Harris. And as soon as I saw it, the people who owned the park removed it. And that was done on purpose. In the same park, Riddle is buried, and that's James Riddle Hoffa's family.
Fascinating. Yeah.
You know, they can't remove the tombstone, so the Riddle tombstone is still in the same park.
Well, hey, before this goes too far,
what's that?
Before we're already been here an hour and a half. I should give you a few more names.
Okay, who was the next one? Who was the next?
Well, I'll just say three of them because none of them were there very long. We got William Sessions, Floyd Clark, and Lewis. And get this name because this just really stood out to me. Freya, but it's spelled F-R-E-E-H, like free H.
Where does Mueller come in?
Now, Mueller, he's a little further up. He's recently. After him, you have Picard, like Captain Picard, and then you have Robert Mueller after that.
Yeah, Harv Bennett was my mother's friend with Chewbacca, Mayhew. My mother's friends.
Yeah.
Star Wars and Star Trek.
Yeah, she was friends.
I went to school with Mueller. His daughter loved me. And the state policeman in charge of Gretchen Fleming's murder is Zimmerman, and I went to school with Peggy Zimmerman, who also loved me and kept trying to date me, but I always told her no.
Right.
And then I sent you a link a little while ago. Zimmerman wrote another story. You'll find it either in your messenger or in your email when you leave here. Now Zimmerman is a news reporter at CNN. And you know, CNN, Anderson kidnapped me and Cooper kidnapped my daughter. I was kidnapped at 4 by Anderson. My daughter was kidnapped at 7 off her school bus with the Kennedy family when she was 7.
Yeah.
And then they murdered Judge Hunter D. Stair, leaving Selfridge Air Force Base, and they murdered my daughter's doctor the next day.
Wow.
And all of this is covering up my truth all the way back to the Osborn family kidnapping me on the day Eisenhower and Truman murdered Admiral Byrd. He had confronted them about selling illegal guns from World War II and getting money and getting money and drugs in return. I don't know if it started there, but I do know it's truth. And at the same time, my father stopped Madeline Duncan Brown's family from selling drugs.
Yeah.
As Stone cut the bone out of my foot illegally.
Madeline, and those don't know, that's LBJ's.
That's as John F. Kennedy was murdered.
Right.
And then people tell me that Kennedy's made all their money bootlegging.
Yeah, that's what it's like a rumor everybody says.
Yeah, I don't believe that because I knew the Kennedys and they were the smartest people I knew. And I was teaching science at 14 and electronics to the Abrams tank plant at 14.
Right.
And I had all my FCC licenses at 12, and my license hung in Channel 7 TV station. I could align their tuner.
Yeah.
I don't believe the Kennedys were smarter than I was, and I don't believe they were bootleggers.
Right. With the exception of this one they got now, this
the Kennedy in the Senate now, he was probably a bootlegger because he's dumber than all hell.
Yeah. He's like the opposite.
And he's ugly as sin.
I don't think it's coincidence we wrote him a letter and all of a sudden he runs down there and sees Sirhan in prison and then runs for president. I I know it's related.
Oh,
somehow.
well, say that in this video. What did you do?
Well, we wrote letters to Robert Kennedy Jr. and
You wrote
to
the letter.
Sirhan
You
Sirhan.
wrote the
I
letter.
did.
You
Yeah,
wrote
I
the
wrote the
letter.
letter. I wrote the letters telling
You also wrote a letter to Alec Baldwin.
to his attorneys. Yeah. Well, I didn't write a letter. I called them, but they didn't. That
They
they
never
didn't
answered you,
respond
did
at
you?
all. Yeah. No.
And
No.
and now they want to recharge him with that murder, don't they? After
Right.
murdering my brother-in-law Baldwin.
Right. Right. So it tells me that his attorneys.
It's just a big cover-up.
Yeah.
I'm the guy they're hiding. You got Alec Baldwin on Hugh Lou, as my mother Lou was with Hoffa at the Sly Fox. And I'm Hugh. Hugh Lou. That's when you got Alec Baldwin
Yeah.
on Hulu.
That's,
And Brian Baldwin had just married my sister. And 2 years prior to that, I saved Sue Baldwin's life from the renegades. They had her chained to a bed and were going to rape her.
mhm.
I got my ass kicked doing that. And they didn't have her chained to the bed yet, but that's what they were planning on doing. And she
Right.
was my friend in high school.
Right. Right.
And Baldwin always ran against Osborn, who runs the sex crime division at the FBI.
In
And
Michigan. Yeah. Hmm.
in California.
Oh, okay.
In Van Nuys, California, and that's where they make all the porno movies. And that's what they kept trying to do to me and my brother, was put us on planes and sell us to gay bars in California,
Yes.
in Van
Yes.
Nuys. This is all truth.
I know. Yeah.
And it was
And now,
it was the FBI director's family and the
Yeah.
people who work for him trying to put us on the planes. And
well, I'm
all
going to
of
have to
it-
get off here shortly here, Hugh, but I got three more of the most recent ones that are left. And
Okay,
just,
well,
if you got a quick word about any of them.
talk about writing JFK a letter.
All right. But just for the sake of those listening, the last three are Comey, McCabe, and Ray. WRAY is who's there now. But I wrote a letter to Sirhan Sirhan and to
I lived in
Robert
Macomb
Kennedy.
County all my life, and Ray is my cousin.
Ray is your cousin.
Go ahead, yes.
So I wrote these letters to him, and then explaining about how Camille Sirhan was kidnapped with you, and the boy in the box was killed the same day by Osborn, and the teachers were Wallace and all this, and then 11 years later, when she married Sirhan, that was the day that supposedly Sirhan killed his.
He married
father.
my cousin Pete. Camille
Okay.
married my cousin Pete.
Was her name Sirhan before or after?
And then that's when Sirhan was framed for Kennedy's murder, Bobby.
Okay. But so 11 years on the very day.
And that's
that
when
Sirhan was shot,
that's
she
at the
gets
same
married.
time. That's at the same time, or after Stone got caught doing surgeries without any medical training, running a hospital in Warren, Michigan, which is the Warren report from Russell, who appointed Manning.
Okay, well, we asked
And
these
Garrison.
guys, that Robert Kennedy Jr. and Sirhan, what's the deal? Do you know Camille Sirhan? How does this connect? No answer from either one. But right after we did, Robert Kennedy Jr. goes and visits Sirhan in prison, and then next thing you know, he's
He
running for
told
president.
Sirhan he knows he didn't murder his dad.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. That was the report, right? Well, hey,
But
I'm gonna
never
have to
but never
finish this up
contacted
here.
never contacted you back.
No, not a
And
word.
neither did Alec Baldwin's
But they responded in ways that seem obvious.
neither did Alec Baldwin or his attorneys.
Not a bit. Not a
And
bit.
Rusty Killen was going to shoot me in the back of the head.
Right. And if they were really defending him
after murdering Brian Baldwin, and Brian Baldwin was on nuclear subs for 18 years.
Yeah.
And he was murdered by a guy named Rusty Hawthorne, a trucker.
Well, I'm going to have to get off here for two reasons. I'm going to have to use the restroom, and I'm also got to go sleep because I got to work in the morning. So
I'm not newsworthy. They just keep hiding me.
Yeah.
And one of the FBI directors made crew after interviewing me for 3 hours.
Right.
On his radio and TV station.
So QAnon, everybody thinks that's your freedom, but no, that's just more of the government.
And then RFK Jr. goes to Q, and he thinks that's truth.
Right.
And he thinks the CIA murdered his dad when it was the FBI.
Right.
And he's a year younger than me.
Oh, and Alex Jones, you know, he's coming back out too. And
RFK is a year younger than me, Greg.
Oh, well, okay. I didn't realize he was that old, but okay. Alex Jones is back out in the news here, and he come from Anderson High School, which I don't think is coincidence. I think it's part of the FBI story.
And then Sandy Locke was my friend, and she's on all the fire extinguishers, and he told everybody when they called Sandy Locke Sandy Hook that the murders of the kids were fake, and they really murder kids. They don't fake it. They don't fake it.
Right. They really do kill them. That's part
of it. And
it's
the government doing it. The government stole $3 trillion from me. They stole my mother's patents for buses, milk trucks, vans, and the Fuller transmission.
Right.
Mrs. Fuller was my grandmother. She owned all of that with Buckminster Fuller. We'll end it here, Greg.
Yeah, have a good night, Hugh.
Good night. You can put this up when you want. I'll send it to you the usual way. Bye.
Okay, I probably won't get to it tonight. But all right, bye.